My name is Tomo Machiba, and from the Climate Technology Center and Network, and hosted by UNEP and the UNIDO. And this webinar is about ocean energy technologies for blue economies in small island and low-lying developing countries, SIDS. And we are pleased and organizing this webinar jointly with Global Network Regional Sustainable Energy Centers, GNFEC, SIDS-DOC, and the Caribbean Community, CARICOM, and the UNIDO. And also, this is presented as a part of CARICOM Energy Week. Today's event is 1.5 hours, and we have pretty long presentations, and showing some agenda here, starting with the welcome opening remarks, and continuously with the arena presentation of role of ocean energy in the context of energy transition. The next, energy situation in SIDS and the state of potential ocean energy by CARICOM Secretariat. The next, from European perspective, European 2030 Ocean Energy Vision by Ocean Energy Europe. The next, it's different appropriate ocean energy technology available to SIDS by Naval Energy France. Then lessons learned from developing PPP for deployment of ocean energy technology, presented by OTEC Resources UK. And integrating gender issues in SIDS Ocean Energy Program, and presented by SIDS-DOC and the CARICOM Secretariat. Then ending up with the Q&A sections and discussing the way forward. And you cannot have a microphone and a camera as a normal participants, but instead, we have the chat functions on the bottom of your box, where you can send questions to everyone or staff members. Thank you very much. So we want to start with presentation of the Albinger, Secretary General of the SIDS-DOC.
Good morning, colleagues.
Floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, colleagues. It's a great honor to share this occasion with you. Many of us have been long-suffering proponents of ocean energy, and I think now we have an opportunity in this post-COVID environment, particularly in the small island states, to advocate for something different. Next slide, please. The purpose of our gathering today is really to see how we can make initial steps towards putting in place a platform that would significantly improve our cooperation. So we're working closely with our regional centers to build what would be a virtual platform, infrastructure where private sector, governments, NGOs, civil societies can have effective cooperation. Next slide, Tomo. We need to do a lot more in terms of improving the awareness about ocean energy technologies. We need to do a lot more exchange of information, and we need to do a lot of capacity building. The need for ocean energy in SIDS is as high as it's ever been because of differences in terms of climate, which is affecting livelihoods, and the impact of the COVID, which has reduced our hard currency earnings and significantly changed our trade deficit. We need to do more in OTEC, and we have to be a bit more coordinated in the way we work. Mitomo. Can you just go all the way to the third to last slide, Tomo?
Screen locked and I can move.
Yeah, it seems to lock. I don't know. Okay, let me close this one. Okay. The example of ocean energy are not many. We basically depend on a few examples, and you see we have some problems with slides, but what we say is in this one I have already gone past. If you go down.
This is end.
Yeah. This is just some of the, yeah, you just read it. Yeah. Yeah. In the case of ocean thermal energy, SIDS have invested through the SIDS DAC and through its member countries a significant amount of time in researching and developing information, identifying interested partners around the vision of this plant. This is a 100 kW plant in the island of Kumajima, Japan. It operates only maybe half a year because the sea temperatures are not constant as they are in our part of the world. But it does give us an idea of basically the promise of this technology. This little plant sits on about 20 hectares of land. It provides cold water primarily to support a host of industries to the point that it employs about 200 people and it generates about 20% of the island's GDP. I think we would all say that that is a situation that we would like to see replicated in a number of small island states to help foster our development, address our trade balances, and meet international obligations to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So I look forward to a lively discussion after the presentations from the colleagues who are all eminent. They've been in the field for a while, they know their business, and we're going to depend on them to help us move this process along and provide support to other governments and other stakeholders who we need to recruit along the way. So welcome to the webinar, colleagues. Back to you, Tumo.
Thank you, Al. Next presentation, welcome remarks from the Solomone Fista, General Manager of PICRI from Tonga. Is he available? I think he's not there, so it's going to move on to the Mr. Gary Jackson.
He sent an excuse, he could not make it.
Okay. So let's move to the Mr. Gary Jackson, Executive Director of PICRI, Barbados. Floor is yours.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. It is actually an honor to be here today, and I'm glad to hear that we are actually looking at this particular technology for the region or for small island development states. Our human capital is a very important resource for us as we deploy these resources. Our people are critical. I would have mentioned the vulnerabilities and mentioned how countries are suffering given the pandemic and our vulnerabilities to climate change as well. So we'll have to build that capacity in understanding the transition and to be part of the transition going forward. In addition to that, we have to set the right policy framework to support these interventions. And these interventions need to have a close relation to the people that it serves. These interventions will need to be informed by the right legislative and regulatory framework that will support these interventions going forward, and that they are actually appropriate for the interventions. We need to have the right plan to support these policy directions, and sometimes the plan will inform the policy and support the people at the same time. These plans need to be rigorous, they need to be integrated, they need to be resilient. And as we develop these integrated resource and resilience plans for our member states, we want to ensure that the right fit for our demand, the right fit for our environment is deployed to support our members or to support our people. As we develop these plans for the short, medium, and long term, we want to ensure that we can actually implement them, and timely so, given the race that we are in, the race that we believe is not for the swift, but for the ones who endure. So when we look at these projects, we have to ensure that these projects can be implemented, and where they need support for de-risking, that we can actually find the right instruments and mechanisms to de-risk these projects so that they can get to fruition to support the people of our region. And then we need to find the right partnerships. These partnerships, I would have mentioned already, setting up this platform is an indication or a good signal to what we are trying to achieve in these partnerships. I've always said the best SDG goal that I see out of the 17 is number 17, partnerships for goals, and it's going to require all of us, as we put it, all hands on deck. But as we look at these projects, we have to ensure that the site is appropriate for the deployment of these technologies. We have to ensure that the resource is there, and to what extent the resource is there to support these projects going forward. And this is an element of de-risking these projects. Then we need to ensure that we have an off-taker, if it's for water, if it's for electricity, if it's for other commodities that are coming off of this particular resource.
Gary, sorry, and can you conclude your remarks? Sorry about that, because of the time.
And then we have to choose the right technology, the right team, and have the right capital going forward. So through our partnerships, we have to ensure that make sure that we have the right structure, who is responsible, who is accountable, who shall support, who shall consult, and who shall inform and implement our interventions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gary. And let's move to the next presentation, and from Arina and Francisco. And the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Tomo. Can we have a full screen, please? In the meantime,
yeah, we can show like this. Sorry about this, but it's more or less full screen.
Okay. Thank you so much, Tomo, and thank you everyone, all the organizers, for inviting Irina to this event on what is now a very important topic for us as ocean energy. So next slide, please. Well, this presentation is based on two new reports from Irina on ocean energy that actually will be launched tomorrow at the annual conference of Ocean Energy Europe. And today I will show you a little bit of a sneak preview of those reports. First of all, we start analyzing the market for ocean energy. What you can see is that currently there is around 0.5 gigawatt of installed capacity on ocean energy technology, but this is mainly two projects which are tidal range projects. But if we look into the new projects, what we have is only around 13 megawatts of installed capacity, mainly on tidal stream technologies and wave energy technologies. Still, OTEC is not really scaling up, and salinity grading is also rather small. And these are mainly concentrated in Europe and somehow in Asia Pacific. However, the good news is that we have been looking into the pipeline of the projects that are announced to start operation in the next 3 to 5 years. And if we sum up all this pipeline, we see that we can, in the next 3 years or 5 years, we can go from just 13 megawatts to more than 3,000 megawatts in a period of just 2 to 3 years. Mainly technologies, the main technologies will continue to be tidal stream and somehow wave energy. And this is in line with IRENA's outlook, where we expect to have at least 10 gigawatts of ocean energy globally by 2030 and more than 100 gigawatts by 2050. Next slide, please. And this scale up is extremely important because this learning curve will take us to a cost reduction that is needed. Currently, we are in the range between 20 to 45 cents of US dollar per kilowatt hour for tidal, a little bit higher for wave. But if we get to this 1 gigawatt, we will be in the range of below 10 cents per kilowatt hour. And this would already be quite competitive, especially in the case of islands where we have electricity tariffs between 20 to even 60 cents of US dollar per kilowatt hour. And this scale up is now propelled also by policy actions like the European Commission, who recently launched their offshore renewal strategy, claiming that they will reach more than 60 gigawatts of ocean energy by 2050, and also Canada with a tailored feed-in tariff for tidal energy. Next slide, please. But the other important thing is that now we are seeing ocean energy coupled with other blue economy activities. We have identified in our report on the table on the left more than 25 projects which are connecting ocean energy technologies with other economic activities such as desalination of water, cooling, air and oil gas platforms, aquaculture, shipping, and also electricity provision for ports and ships. So we see that already these new business models are bringing new business cases for ocean energy and also supporting a global blue economy, particularly important for islands. Next slide, please. And I think Dr. Albinga already mentioned the case of OTEC. Despite it is not yet scaling up as fast as we would expect, OTEC brings some interesting benefits for islands. Like we said, for example, on the left, we said that it's quite straightforward to couple OTEC technologies with water desalination, also with cooling using seawater, which brings a number of benefits for the tourism and also for the agriculture industries. And on the right, we see a study from 2019 from Johnston estimating the OTEC capacity or theoretical resources in the Caribbean, where we see that it could add up to 1 gigawatt of potential capacity of OTEC in the Caribbean. In some countries, the OTEC capacity is even higher than the current electricity demand. So there is still a big untapped potential for OTEC technologies in the Caribbean. Next slide, please. Already some of you mentioned the key recommendations in terms of technology, continue with R&D and standardization, policy as Canada is doing, tailor preferential feed-in tariffs. Environmentally, it's important to continue with environmental impact assessment, and in infrastructure, the electricity grid is extremely important. And final slide, please. And because of that, IRENA has recently established a government-to-government collaborative framework on ocean energy and offshore renewables. This new initiative aims to bring governments interested in ocean energy technologies to work together to share best practices and foster the deployment of these technologies. Currently, we have more than 40 countries already engaged in this collaborative framework. It is facilitated by 2 countries, the Kingdom of Tonga and Italy, and now is also engaging with the industry through Ocean Energy Europe and engagement of the Global Wind Energy Council. So the invitation for all the delegates hearing us today from SIDS is to please engage also, or they have now the possibility to also engage your government in this collaborative framework where you will benefit from this peer-to-peer collaboration and also interaction with the industry to support a rapid deployment of ocean energy technologies in your country. Next slide, please. Well, as I mentioned, tomorrow at the Ocean Energy Europe annual event, we'll be launching these 2 reports, and please, they will be freely available in our publications website. And if you have any question or if you would like to engage in the IRENA collaborative framework for ocean energy, please tell your government delegates to contact us at irena.org or also info@irena.org. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Francisco, and very good overview about technology, the status of the advancement. Thank you. So next presentation is Mr. Devon Gardner and the Head Energy Program CARICOM Secretariat from Guyana about energy situation in SIDS and state and the potential of ocean energy. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Let me share my camera so that those who have not seen me before would have sight of.
Great to see you.
Yes. Well, I know we have 15 minutes on this presentation, so I'll try not to be too long, but really quite a bit have been said by Al and the IRENA colleague, but nevertheless, I want to contextualize some within the current state of issues that we are facing within the CARICOM region. If you go to the next slide, you will see where I have listed the countries in CARICOM. There are 15 member states. You will see here, and there are a number of economic issues that the countries face. You'll notice that the HDIs are not so so great. More importantly, you will notice that all the countries have, Trinidad, of course, is now in a worse state. This was in 2017, and since 2018, 2019, they went to a near recession state, and they had actually their debt to GDP ratio has gone up now. But all the countries have very high debt to GDP ratios. This is something that is common. You would see that some of these are over 100% in some instances. A lot of that, Al pointed out, would have had to do with the fact that many of the countries are facing significantly distorted economies in terms of the openness of their economies to different kinds of shocks. And one of those shocks that the economies are open to are oil price shocks, which are frequent and oftentimes change the dynamics of the GDPs and the HDIs and all the other economic indicators on which we depend. You will notice that of the installed capacity that exists, I think there was the bottom of the slide is not showing well, but there was it's a 5.5 gigawatts of 5.5 gigawatts of electricity that we have installed in CARICOM as a whole. Of that, over 5 gigawatts is really fossil-based. Oil, whether it be diesel or light fuel oil or heavy fuel oil, are usually used to run most of our generation. Renewable energy accounts for just for under 600 megawatts across the region. And if we go to the next slide, we will see where, to a large extent, even though renewable energy accounts for a small share, there are lots of renewable energy options and opportunities that are available in SIDS. All countries have solar options, all have wind in specific locations, naturally. But of course, there are limited geothermal and hydro in some countries, biomass options too. But the ocean and options are the ones we are focusing today on. We see that a majority of the countries have OTEC and SWAC options available. You would see, I've seen that the IRENA colleague show some potential numbers that were calculated by Johnstone in 2019 from a CDB sponsored study that said that you have up to 1 gigawatt of OTEC potential. And of course, ocean current has been identified too, previously has been available in some countries. There hasn't been a lot of work on tide except for that recent Johnstone. So the tidal discussions are just now beginning. If we go to the next slide, we have seen also that there is now a lot of conversation around offshore wind, a lot of excitement around offshore wind because of the price reductions that we are seeing in the technology, especially for the nearshore technology. And offshore wind is becoming interesting for a lot of countries, including, incidentally, some of those countries that have large land masses. You would have seen that Belize, Guyana, and Suriname are members of CARICOM. The issue is that some of the larger population and demand centers are coastal, even though those countries tend to have large land masses. But because those populations are so islanded by the forests and the types of landscape that they have, the view is that it is very expensive to bring sometimes the renewable energy from where it's located in the interior, in the hinterland, into the coastal areas. And the view is that some of these ocean energy options, which are near the demand centers in the coastal population areas, are useful to consider. If we go to the next slide, we will see where there is the energy vision for CARICOM and the goals, which speaks to the fact that we should be offering reliable, affordable and sustainable provision of energy services that are matched to the developmental needs. So what are the sustainable development needs of the region? So in a sense, we are not focused on electricity, we are not focused on fuels, we are focused on energy services. And so where those energy services come from is what, doesn't matter so long as they are able to provide us with the kind of integrated structures that we are looking for, that are capable of supporting our sustainable development needs. And some of those conversations will take place, I'm sure. I want to point out goal 3 especially, where we are talking about global example for renewable energy use, which means therefore, if we are going to be a global example, it can't simply be solar and battery, because that cannot be a global example if it is that we are simply depending on what is the most commercially mature technologies, but really looking for what is transformative and appropriate to our region. If we go to the next slide, we will see where it is that the energy situation is coming from in terms of renewable energy integration. It's less than optimized. 2012, it was around 6.2% penetration, 11.5%. It's closer to 12% in 2019. Those numbers are sometimes not always consistent, but we're close to around 12% in 2019. But we have targets, regional targets of 28% by 2022 and to 47% by 2027 for renewable energy integration. If we go to the next slide, we'll see that a majority of the renewable energy that has been integrated in CARICOM so far is coming from hydro. And that hydro is based mostly in 3 countries, in Belize, in Suriname, and to a lesser extent, there is some amount of that hydro that is in St. Vincent, some in Dominica, and some in Jamaica. So it's mostly hydro that accounts for the lion's share of that renewable. Of course, wind and solar are the 2 other major contributors to the renewable energy that we have. If we go to the next slide, it shows us what it looks like in terms of the countries where those renewables are based. As I said, Suriname and Belize dominate because of a significant amount of it from hydro, and then Dominica, of course, also a significant amount from hydro. Haiti has a significant amount of hydro and biomass. But of course, there are some issues with Haiti, which makes it a special case and a different case. Most of the others have small amounts of biomass like Guyana, and of course, there's solar and wind. If we go to the next slide, the point I'm trying to make around this argument is that these renewable energies that we have integrated in our system are extremely variable and vulnerable to climate change impacts. We are talking about hydro, which has seasonal variability due to hydrometeorological, the hydrology changes and the impacts and rainfall that are emerging already due to climate and other related impacts. If we go to the next slide, we will see too that already with these, we are dealing with solar and wind, and we are talking about integrating a lot of solar and wind. If we are to meet our 2027 target, we are talking about 3.5 gigawatts more of renewable energy, and people are talking about solar and wind. We see that we are already struggling with variability based on the ramp rates of this wind farm. This is a real wind farm in Jamaica. We are seeing the kind of ramping rates that we have throughout the day, and we are already struggling to integrate these sources with these kind of variabilities. If we go to the next one, we'll see the same happens with solar, that there is also significant ramp rates throughout the day for the solar, which has been integrated into our system. So these are making our systems more difficult to operate and more expensive to operate. If we go to the next slide, we are also seeing that outside of the variabilities, some of these systems, including solar, are being affected by extreme weather events. This is a solar system in St. Thomas after Hurricane Maria passed, and this is what happened. It decimated the entire solar field. If we go to the next slide, we see that other aspects of our system are vulnerable. This is a delivery, transmission, and distribution. This is more the distribution lines. We see that some of our distribution lines are down in the road after hurricanes and so on. Oftentimes, our transmission distribution systems, our grids in general, get affected by extreme weather events. So the configuration of our system is one that we need to focus on improving. If we see also here on the demand side, then we have, the end users get affected, and therefore, if you lose the load, you also have a problem. What we are trying to do within the CARICOM region is to look at OTEC within this climate resilient sustainable energy supply bucket, so that we, in a sense, help to build sustainable supplies of energy through OTEC, through the integration of OTEC, SWAC, and other ocean resources that can build the right kind of system that will make us less less prone to supply and transmission and distribution and demand shocks. If we go to the next slide, we will see to a large extent that we are trying to shift our systems from one where there's a traditional generation, transmission, distribution of power to a system where, if we go to the next slide, we focus on energy services, where it is more resource linked. There is more vertical linkage and more inter and cross-sectoral linkages, where it is that we focus on capturing the resource and moving it through a value chain that provides energy services, whether those services are electricity or cooling or other heating or otherwise, so that we really focus on the value added at the end of the chain. If we go to the next slide, we will see that to a large extent that will also include opportunities for electric mobility and transport, and that includes hydrogen. And we see OTEC and some of the ocean options as being able to facilitate some of our interest in the hydrogen economy, including hydrogen use for transport. If we go to the next slide now, we will see to a large extent that OTEC, as we would have seen many of the presenters spoke about, is a resource that's available in the Caribbean. We have seen that Mackay has used OTEC in Hawaii, so it's there. Alan spoke earlier about the Kojima project. I sometimes forget how to pronounce it. But at the political level, what I will show you is that CARICOM ministers have agreed that we need to prioritize OTEC and SWAC, and that we need to find a way to ensure that energy, water, and food are developed as part of the sustainable development mechanism that links OTEC, SWAC, and other sectors, including agriculture. So there is political mandates there and political backing there. If we go to the next slide, what CARICOM has been doing in respect to that is to really look at how it is that we can build, therefore, that nexus strengthening between climate and energy by ensuring that food, water, and energy are integrally linked, that help the countries in such a way that they can adapt socio-economically to the potential impacts of climate change. And in so doing, that will allow them to make some amount of contribution to mitigation. So we are not mitigation focused in our approach, but we are focused on adaptation with the intention that in pursuing our adaptation goals, there'll be a mitigation co-benefit. And that's the approach that we are taking. If we go to the next slide, we will see, therefore, that within the context of ocean energy, there are some issues that, of course, we have come up with through a number of interactions. Most recently, in November 2019, we had a Caribbean renewable energy, what we call Marine Energy Technology Forum in Grenada, and within that forum, we had many countries here from the region discussing options and and so on for consideration. We had experts providing guidance, and these were some of the perspectives and messages which came out. That size matters, cost matters. There are experts in the room who will talk to us about some of these things, but these are some of the things we want to focus on. How is it we can achieve the right skills, the right market, the right scale of technology, the right scale of market, the right kind of cost and investment risk reduction and management, the right kind of quality and quantity of data, how to best adapt the technology to markets rather than force the markets to adapt the technology like we're trying to do with solar and wind. And how do we, as Al pointed out earlier, account for the co-benefits so we can properly do the cost accounting and make sure that all sectors are able to understand what it is that they are gaining from energy projects, how it is that we can ensure that the proper cost accounting is done throughout the entire value chain, including the public service obligations. If it is we are paying for water with public money, and there is a public service, to be derived from the water co-benefit of OTEC, how do we ensure that those resources that were being used to generate water previously can be contributed towards OTEC projects and other projects of that nature? If we go to the next slide, the point we're going to raise here is really one that is related to the fact that there is a cost value balance that needs to be struck. We know that we are going to always face the issue of bounded rationality. But the bottom line is that there is a significant benefit to be gained in terms of energy security on the one hand, but more so the integral pursuit of a blue economy. In terms of bounded rationality, we know that from time to time there will be conflicting interests, conflicting views, especially among those who are decision makers in terms of what they see as the options that suits them best, especially them in their own respective portfolios. But we need to be able to generate the kind of information that will allow us to show where it is that cost value benefits can be derived for the country as a whole. If we go to the next slide, we will see.
Devon, can you conclude in 1 minute? Sorry.
I will try. I should be able to run 2 minutes max. So what we are doing is attacking the cost model, ensuring that we recognize that there are regular technologies such as diesel and so on, which are low in initial cost, and of course the cost for fuel is not usually typically considered when the cost of these projects are considered. We recognize that renewable projects have additional capital costs, and so the cost is usually paid up front. And we recognize that, especially for new technologies like OTEC, there's a transaction cost which sometimes is added. And we figure that we want to do a cost reduction model, as I said, these ministers have asked us to do. And so we are attacking first this transaction cost piece by working on the capacity, understanding how. And then we are doing that through a framework where we set a strategic approach that generates strategies at the country level and then real projects. And so this is part of what we are discussing today, how it is that we'll be able to get to projects. If we go to the next slide, we will see where within the context, what we are doing within CARICOM is linked to understanding the global opportunities, figuring out how to do cost reduction through research, innovation, and pilot testing, working, as Al said earlier, with as they say, coalitions of the willing, private and public sector both, establishing corridors and market boundaries within the region where it is that the different technologies are able to function best and where the resources are optimal and where there are countries which have interest in off-take markets. And of course, finding ways in which universities can play a real integrated role within the context of this development. If you go to the next slide, and I'm at the second to last slide here, some of the next steps which we agreed on at CARICOM level is that we are going to establish a working group by Q1 next year to start building out the capability of CARICOM to integrate ocean and renewable energy into its system. Preliminary advanced studies are being developed, and of course we are hoping to pilot work. And in that regard, we are looking at the regulatory and cost models. We are looking at how it is we can build the right kind of financing models and their ways and capacity building. We intend to integrate with what SIDS is doing, so that in a sense we pretty much just plug simply into the SIDS platform and transfer information and knowledge from the SIDS platform into our working groups and vice versa. So there will be a two-way connection between them. So just to wrap up now, really the bottom line is that we recognize that our countries are different and we have to find energy supply issues, solutions that are different because our supply problems are different. If we go to the last slide, in a sense, what we are really looking for is a future where we have deep integration of our oceans with our on-land sectors, because at the end of the day, that is really how we will get the kind of sustainable development that we want. Thank you very much for taking the time out to listen to us today.
Thank you, Devon, and a great presentation on overview about energy situation in SIDS. Next presentation is Mr. Remy Gruet, CEO of the Ocean Energy Europe, about European 2030 Ocean Energy Vision. I hand over to Remy for that.
Yes, thank you very much. Tomorrow and good afternoon, everybody, for those of you in my time zone, and good morning and good evening to the others. Indeed, I will focus my presentation on wave and tidal because Emmanuel and the next presenters are focusing on OTEC, and they will do a much better job than me, / we will repeat ourselves. So just to give you 2 words about us, Ocean Energy Europe is a trade association representing the sector in Europe. We have 120 members ranging from manufacturers of machines to utilities, developers, supply chain, and even universities and regions. You can see some of the lead partners here. Notably, we have a number of bigger players that have joined up recently from the oil and gas sector, Eni and NL as well. So there is an interest there that is building up. One thing I wanted to point out is why we are Ocean Energy Europe. We have a number of links with many other organizations. We are the largest global network of ocean energy professionals. We work with Canada department and industry level, with the US Department of Energy, with South America to a certain extent. We have a memorandum of understanding which we'll sign with ARENA tomorrow. Most of our board members are also involved in the IEA OES, Ocean Energy Systems. And we also have extended links to Asia in the last few years, Japan, Indonesia, China, Australia. So it's just to say that while we are a European-focused in the market, we are looking at what's happening everywhere. Now, I wanted to give you a short overview of what's happening in wind and tidal at the moment, where we are. You seem to have already a fairly good understanding of the technologies, especially OTEC. Tidal is very much at pilot farm stage. It's looking towards rollout. Just wanted to show you a number of projects. The previous one was Scottish. This is a French project. This is a German English project, which is being installed in Canada. Is actually the second version of that device is being installed as we speak. China has already invested in tidal as well. They have 4 different types of turbines that are being tested under that platform, which is in the region close to Shanghai. So tidal is very much at pilot farm stage. You have a number of devices already in the water. We're trying to crack the valley of death. We're trying to get the finances, reduce the risk, as Devon was mentioning, and get the financiers to back us up to basically get into commercial technology. Wave is not quite as developed, despite the fact that, as you see on this picture, some manufacturers have made multi-device, have produced several devices. It is mostly at the moment at prototype stage. This is a device produced by Eni and put in the water in the Adriatic Sea in the Mediterranean. It's powering an oil and gas platform. This is an Irish manufacturer. They manufactured in the US and they installed in Hawaii. It's also a different design, but you can see it's a fairly advanced machine. It's fairly big. It's a 1 megawatt device. OPT is a US manufacturers. They also power, specifically target the oil and gas sector and power smaller small applications like remotely operated vehicles or potentially oil and gas platforms as well. And to finally finish with China again, yet another design installed in China. As you can see, several of these designs look very different, and to a certain extent it's because the resource itself is different. Some of them are near shore, some of them are offshore, some are deep, some are shallow waters, and some are big waves, some are slower and less aggressive waves, climates. And some of them are simply different because we haven't fully realized which one of those concepts is going to be the most cost effective going forward. So there is a resource on one hand, and then there is a need for further convergence in the technology on the other. OTEC and SWAC, just to show you one project that's in Marseille in France. It's a 20 megawatt project. There are 2 20 megawatt projects in France dealing with SWAC. So again, I'll let Emmanuel tell you more about this, but it's something that also works with lower temperature differences. I think the difference here we're talking about is about 5 degrees Celsius. So why should we do ocean energy? And this is a question we often get, and to a certain extent, you have already some of the answers. There is a great worldwide potential. I just wanted to show you a map of, not of the potential, because you've seen plenty of those. This is a map of projects that are currently being developed or that are already being constructed. So most of the countries I've already mentioned are represented. Obviously, the Caribbean, a country like Indonesia, the Philippines, which obviously are developing countries and from a European perspective are less immediate to come to mind when we're talking about renewables, but have already taken a very strong interest in the technologies. Now, obviously, a second reason are jobs and a pan-European supply chain for Europe, but this is valid for any region. And I want to use the word region as a region of pan-national region, so several countries together, whether they're SIDS or whether they are larger European countries. So you can see on this map, this is a vision of what we could have by 2030 with different job operations. So operations, heavy manufacturing, specialized manufacturing services, all of these create jobs around installation of wave and tidal and OTEC devices. Obviously, strong focus on the coast, but as you can see on the map, there are also opportunities for countries further inland, even countries like Czech Republic or Austria, who have no access to the sea. But currently, 2 of the most advanced tidal turbines in the world are being built in Austria and in Germany, in the south of Germany. So in areas where the sea is very, very far away. 400,000 jobs is what we estimate by 2050 in the EU, 1.2 million globally. Now, Devon mentioned wind and solar as the two technologies that were most installed already in the SIDS. Obviously, the diesel capacity you already have and the cost of importing diesel makes the SIDS markets very specific markets for electricity production. What we think ocean energy can bring to that is that it can complement wind and PV. The graph Devon was showing about the variability of wind, this is something where having additional different types of renewables on the same grid system can have a very positive impact on. Tidal specifically is 100% predictable. I can tell you today how much one tidal turbine in this area is going to produce in 10 years on Wednesday at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, because the Mayas could do it, we can do it even better. Tidal depends on the moon, and we know very well how that works. So with tidal, with a bit of storage, you're looking at 24/7 generation. Waves has a different advantage. Obviously, the waves we use are waves that are generated by the wind. So when the wind starts, obviously the wind turbines start turning, the waves build up, and then the wave device starts spinning as well and generating electricity. When the wind stops, obviously the wind turbines stop immediately, but the wave devices continue. So for a number of hours, this is really a benefit that you can see. Now, final point on that is obviously, again, for SIDS, we've heard about tourism earlier from Albert. High social acceptance, largely invisible. I want to add, obviously, low impact on the land. Most of the technology you're going to install outside. So all of these are very specificity, which are really interesting and which probably can offset some of the cost differential that we have at the moment, because the technologies are not commercial, but we will still have up until 2030 between wind and solar, who are going to be very cheap, and those technologies who are reducing. Now, I've been asked to talk a bit about 2030, so I just wanted to put on 2 slides where we think we're going to be. And this is, I have to say that these figures are European, so apologies, we have not, I leave to Arina the potential of looking global. But 2.4 gigawatts of capacity deployed, 93% of that in European water, which doesn't mean it's going to be mainland Europe. It could be European islands as well. In fact, a number of my members have already deployed or developed projects for French islands. And with that level, we target a cost of about 90 euros per megawatt hour, which is already very aggressive and very, very low. It's roughly, on average, it's where offshore wind is at the moment, bottom-mounted offshore wind, with floating being around 250. For wave, about 500 megawatts of capacity by 2030. Again, very strong focus on European waters, and cost down a bit higher, obviously, because it's not quite reached the economies of scale that tidal would have, so 110 euros per megawatt hour. So all of these figures and a lot more data on this can be found in the brochure we produced, which is called Vision to 2030. It's on our website, available for download. Now, a final word on policy, because obviously how we get there is the key question. The solution to go commercial is very simple. It's about deploy, deploy, deploy. You cannot reduce cost. You cannot create manufacturing capacity if you don't have a clear market. So to deploy, you need 4 things. The first thing you need is a clear and ambitious market signal. So the signal will attract investors. It will attract utilities. It will show large manufacturers that there is a potential and that it's worth investing in manufacturing capacity. The second point is to unlock the next phase. So we need revenue support, accessible revenue support, or some form of compensation, because if you look at SIDS, like with the price of diesel generation, which is going to be anywhere between, say, $400 and $600 per megawatt hour, you have possibilities to basically even reduce that cost for the country, but still give a wave or a tidal device manufacturer more than he would get in on a market in a mainland European country, for example. The third point that is also very interesting is to use financial instruments to reduce the cost of capital, because the cost of capital can be about half the cost of a project today. So if you want to reduce the cost while making finances available for cheap, essentially with low rate loans, public equity, insurance coverage, all of these things, and obviously grants to a certain extent still, but all of these things can dramatically reduce the cost of the LCOE and the cost per megawatt hour down the line. And finally, to continue the technology push, obviously further research and innovation needs to be invested. So this slide is a bit the same, so I'll pass it. I just wanted to tell you this. If you have more questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Remy. And the next presentation is Mr. Emmanuel Brocha, and from the Nava Energy France. So, Mr. Brocha, the floor is yours. Can you unmute? We cannot hear your voice. Sorry, I cannot hear you. Can you try unmute again? Sorry, désolé. Can you? Hello.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Now
Okay.
you can
Okay.
talk. Yes.
Okay, good. Yeah. Sorry, I was actually muted by organization. I don't know why. Sorry. Thank you. First of all, I just want to thanks the organizer for this webinar. Can you go to the next slide? Obviously, I want to start saying that, as all you guys know, there is no planet B, and there is no plan B if we're talking about climate change. And this global illustration shows clearly that ocean energy shall be a game changer and shall be a major contributor for the climate change. And it is a unique opportunity for small islands, developing states. Next slide, please. So the first point I would like to address is to say what are the energy challenges in small islands territories. It is diverse, and the first, if you're looking at the SIDS, there's a big dependence on fossil fuels, and those territories also kind of suffer from no grid interconnections and a sort of limitation of space, because obviously it's islands. But the limitation of space and the harsh environmental conditions of the islands, many of those are suffering from tropical storms, makes that the renewable technologies and the renewable solution for SIDS are quite limited. You cannot implement every renewable technologies to those islands. And all those, can you come back, please? All those leads to, thank you, to a very high cost of energy in these islands. But those challenges are something, but those must also be considered as outstanding opportunities, developing renewable in those territories. And I will address after the technologies, but outstanding opportunities for SIDS means a tremendous contribution of renewable ocean energies, granting energy autonomy for SIDS, granting energy independency, granting energy sovereignties for policymakers, creating local jobs, creating economic activities, and gathering the local competencies, not only on the island point of view, but also on a regional extent point of view. And obviously, it's a major contribution to post-COVID resilience in this current situation. Can you go to the next slide, please? We mentioned OTEC quite a few times in this presentation and in this webinar today, and I really would like to emphasize on that because OTEC deep sea conversion is a very relevant ocean energy technologies for SIDS. What is the solution we're talking about? The solution we're talking about is building onshore fully renewable cogeneration plants. Why do we say cogeneration plant? Because from the deep sea water we are going to pump, you see in the illustration the pumping station, there are multiple use cases from this cold water. The first one is obviously renewable electricity, but there's also the renewable air conditioning known as SWAC. But this cooling is also can also be a major contributor in terms of industrial cooling. You know, the contribution of the cold water to the conventional cooling system of thermal plant or biomass plant might be a major contributor. In the revenue schemes of the project. Fresh water is also something that we can consider as a very interesting use case. And not only fresh water, but renewable fresh water, which is something quite different. Aquaculture, cosmetics. So to make a long story short, those OTEC deep sea conversion plants are granting the possibility in one only plant to have multiple use cases and then go to a cost of energy and a cost of uses of the cold water, which makes a lot of sense for the territories depending on their needs. If it's either on electricity or on air conditioning or industrial cooling or freshwater or aquaculture. And one of the biggest contribution of OTEC is the fact that it's a baseload production. There is no intermittency on OTEC. It's a 24/7 production, and it's a zero carbon, obviously. And it grants to the project developers and to the territories a very good advantage in the term to decrease the dependence on fossil fuel. And if OTEC is sometimes considered as a capital intensive, you have to consider that it's a risk-free ownership cost. And what we're looking for is the leverage cost of energy. And the framework of financing is quite different because you have a risk-free ownership cost. Everyone here hearing me can commit on what is going to be the price of the seawater barrel in 10 years. It's going to be still free. And the fuel of OTEC is the seawater, which is surrounding all those islands and is abundant. So that's a fuel for the OTEC cogeneration plant that shall be used. And OTEC is in this framework a major contributor to energy independency, to energy autonomy, and shall bring sovereignty to policymakers. Obviously, it also contributes to local jobs. I also want to take advantage of today's webinar to also discuss, next slide please, on the, can you go to the next slide please? Oh, can you hear me? Yeah. No, sorry, the slide before. Oh, you've been too far. Yeah, the one before. Yeah, thank you. Yes, I wanted also to emphasize on another suitable technology for SIDS, which is the floating offshore wind turbines. Those are really also really interesting because the floating offshore wind is mostly using mature technologies in operations. And those technologies can cope with the very severe environmental conditions. And obviously floating offshore wind has a tremendous advantage for SIDS because we're talking about offshore units without any land pressure on the islands. And if it is not predictable, if it is not baseload like OTEC, it is still really interesting because it is highly accessible and available gross resource, because the average load factor for floating wind is up to 50%, which makes things quite interesting in terms of feature for renewable energy for SIDS. Much better than solar, obviously, which is something like 18%. So the efficiency is interesting because it's regular and the offshore wind is quite steady. You have a limited impact because the distance from the coast is can limit the impact. And these technologies also interesting in the fact that it proposing the creation of local jobs, because many things can be done locally, and also shall bring a significant contribution to energy independency and autonomy. This is important to note because now in the world there are now many official tenders for floating wind. In Japan, in France, in Scotland, in US, they're talking about 10 gigawatts 2040. So floating wind is now a game changer that is going to be, and that is now accessible for SIDS, maybe with smaller turbines, maybe not 10 gigawatt turbines or 15 gigawatt turbines, but just imagine an array of like 50 or 100 or 150 megawatt for an island. It's a major contributor for the ocean energy for SIDS. So if we go to the next slide, how these things are possible today. You know, if I am taking back what we heard from previous presentations, we discussed a lot of this topic: de-risking, partnership, site and resource studies, off-takers, collaborations, and how to attract investors. I think it's really something really important on this framework to note that the project can actually be developed in SIDS, and it requires a combination of efforts from all the stakeholders. The first contributors are obviously the territories, implementing a clear renewable political roadmap, but also giving visibility to developers and investors with public tenders and incentive feed-in tariff. You know, at the end of the day, all those projects will require investments in the territories, and attracting investors has a direct link with the possibility to increase the feasibility of the project and decrease the risk register and the risk portfolio of the project. And if the territories are giving visibilities, publishing public tenders, and providing funds to perform the site studies and feasibility studies, then it will show a very visible and clear signal and will give confidence to the project stakeholders and the project investors to invest in this country and not another one, because the project will be less risky than feasible. Obviously, all the public international organizations are from great support, supporting territories initiative and gathering stakeholders. What we are doing today is a very good example. Advocating for development of renewables and providing grants and loans through multilaterals and international cooperation budgets. And we've seen in previous presentation that there's a very clear appeal for donors, And the thing that needs to be done on a short-term basis is really performing site studies and feasibility studies, because those studies will bring evidence in the territories that the projects are feasible. And then it's the necessary steps to attract investors and then to have actual project on a short-term basis. Obviously, the developers and the utilities can be a contributor, developing projects with local content schemes because they will provide employment. And all the industrial are also great contributors, because some industrials today, tier 1 contractors, can provide guarantees on performance and technology. And these guarantees on the technology and on the performance is a significant contribution to project bankability and to project financeability. You know, if the OTEC power plants is guaranteed in terms of performance, if the floating wind turbine is guaranteed on its performance by the industrial, then the investor can invest in good faith and can invest with a low risk profile. Then the project will actually perform. So in order to do so, once again, on a very short-term basis, the main objective is to be able to fund site studies and feasibility studies. And also the last contribution is the one from academics with R&D programs linked with the project and with the project stakeholders. And also academics are major contributors because they will set up and manage training program locally in order to develop the necessary skills for the operations of the OTEC power plant and of the operations of the floating offshore wind turbines. But this will not only be necessary and useful in the framework of the local project, but also can spread out in a regional logic. And you guys in the SIDS communities are organized through organizations, and the collaboration between different SIDS is also something significant. So I just wanted to emphasize on this presentation today. And I thank you for your attention, and should you have any question, please feel free to address it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brochard. And move on to the next presentation with Ms. Dangrek, and from the OTEC Resources United Kingdom. So floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tomo. Thank you to the organizers of this webinar for putting on a brilliant and well-organized event. It's an honor to be here and speak about my company and our team. I want to avoid repeating some of the previous speakers, so I'm going to give you a bit about my backstory and tell you why our company came to be, and then more pertinently, where we're going. So I was born when atmospheric CO2 levels were at 349 ppm. I know I'm really showing my age. I grew up a few miles from the North Sea in the United Kingdom, which is an island nation as well. My father was a shop manager in our local town, and my mother stayed at home to raise myself and my brothers. The seaside played an important part in our community and in our culture. Our fish and chips came from cod from our local fishermen, and our potatoes came from our local farmers. In fact, I have memories of my grandfather taking me to buy his favourite jellied eels, which is an old working class British dish. And if any of the delegates in this webinar find themselves in London, please contact me, and I would love to take you to one of the few places left that you can still buy jellied eels. The sea also brought tourism to my area in the summer months. So you could say that our livelihoods came from the sea, our food, our employment, our leisure. So I've always had an immense appreciation for the sea and the natural environment. Now, fast forward to the year 2014, atmospheric CO2 levels are at 397 ppm. I was an established manager for an online fashion company. My marketing team ran campaigns to sell as much Gucci and Louis Vuitton as possible. One evening, I was watching David Attenborough's Frozen Planet. On Thin Ice was the episode, which documented the ice caps receding. I felt an immediate call that there was nothing more important in the world than being part of the effort towards reversing the effects of climate change. And the next day, I quit my job. Now, 2014, a very different world. The narrative was not nearly as much about climate change or a climate emergency as it is today. SIDS had been ringing the alarm bells for years, decades, but the rest of the world was really still asleep. I researched where I could have a meaningful impact on the development of an emerging clean technology. There was obviously a positive trajectory with solar, wind, batteries, wave and tidal a little later. These were all household names. But then I came across OTEC, ocean thermal energy conversion. And I thought, why hasn't this progressed nearly as fast as anything else? Conventional renewables seem to have a resource or efficiency barrier. Nothing was quite perfect. But the ocean thermal is 24/7. You can't switch off the ocean. My theory was really that progress was slow because of the concentration of the resource. OTEC was not going to power the United Kingdom. It's not going to power Silicon Valley or New York. It might power China a little, but it's not going to power Russia, France, Germany, Italy, Spain, Canada. And this is where the funding for research and innovation had always been concentrated. And I realized I could use my position in the UK and Europe to further the development of what I believe to be the most unique renewable energy solution. But I just quit my job. I had no money. I had little engineering experience. How do you design and build a renewable energy product from scratch with no money? Well, that was my first struggle. So I adopted a strict work ethic that I was going to read every book and every academic paper about OTEC. I called up people who had been working their entire careers in OTEC, mostly in Hawaii, and I spoke to end users that could eventually use OTEC for their power. Fast forward again to 2018, atmospheric CO2 now at 405 ppm. The answer to my struggles lied in building a team. I had my first investor from the world's only grid-connected OTEC plant. I had a team of engineers who had designed and built $100 million floating assets for the oil and gas giants. We were awarded €250,000 in grants, and we had 5 resorts in the Maldives that wanted to trial our technology. Now, consultation with our customers was paramount. It guided the design of our OTEC plant to be appropriate for off-grid small islands. After much consideration and research, we decided that the OTEC plant had to be installed on a barge. This solved 2 key problems for us. 1, no land is required. Our off-takers would not have to face a trade-off between land for energy, housing, agriculture. If tropical revolving storms come in, it's a lot easier to move a barge than it is a fixed installation. Secondly, it reduces the length of one of the most expensive components. Because when you identify an OTEC resource, you have to decide, are you transporting that water over kilometers of pipe? Or are you generating electricity at the source and transmitting the power via a subsea cable? Now, there are benefits and challenges to both setups, as we've heard, but limiting the length of that pipe to be as short as possible was key for our competitive economics and also serving the broadest market possible. So we designed the OTEC barge. This is a 1.5 megawatt net system with a capacity factor of around 90 to 95%. The unit cost for a first generation OTEC barge is already lower than diesel in a lot of small island developing states. And we don't need to use any land. The barge is just 70 by 20 meters. And that footprint is 10 times smaller than what solar PV would use for the same capacity. Everything was going perfectly. What could possibly go wrong? Enter 2020, March 2020. Sadly, this headline now seems like a perfectly normal 2020 event. But we did not foresee the vulnerability of tourism. We'd invested most of our capital in designing an OTEC plant for the Maldives resorts. We had done the feasibility study, our supply chain was engaged, and we were starting to negotiate the power purchase agreement. And then, in a flash, our pioneering customer is forced to shut down all of their resorts. What do? Do we wait for COVID-19 to blow over? Not at 411 ppm. There is clearly no time. Now, if you allow me to get philosophical for a moment, the obstacle is the way or path is an ancient proverb adopted into Stoic philosophy, which I subscribe strongly to. This means when a challenge or obstacle is presented in your path, an opportunity lies in navigating that obstacle. It's not a reason or means to quit or give up. So we had to find a new pathway to bringing our OTEC barge to the world. Now, where would benefit from our work or OTEC? A product that can generate 24/7 baseload power, that has a cost curve that will trend below all other fossil fuels, structures that can be designed to endure hurricanes and tsunamis, ecological superiority to solar PV. It takes up no land and it's optimum in the underserved end markets. It delivers on at least 6 SDGs. I welcome any ideas. On the 4th of May this year, I had a phone call with Dr. Al Binger of SIDS. I said, we designed this technology for small island tourist resorts, but the sector has been decimated. That conversation with Dr. Binger was our opportunity in navigating the obstacle. Dr. Binger helped us to understand that whilst COVID had diminished one opportunity, the disproportionate effect which it had on SIDS at a national level that created more urgency than ever for solutions like the OTEC barge. Of course, the difference between a project for an island tourist resort and a national infrastructure project is quite large. And that's why we needed a public-private partnership. And this has been the best strategic decision the company has made in terms of partnerships. I wish we could have done this sooner. So why PPPs? Well, so far, our relationship with SIDS has been a catalyst in forging new partnerships with us, including working with Mr. Luisilio Pinto, who sadly couldn't make it today. It enables an environment that maximizes the benefit for the SIDS, which gains trust and credibility in the partnership. It engaged the I1, which maximizes our impact on SDG 5, and it qualifies the project for numerous development incentives. Obviously, there are some challenges, which is why SIDS is an ideal partner for us. The opportunity of building a policy framework isn't just focused on one nation or one geography. It can be exported to all the other SIDS. We can start building the capacity for OTEC and go all in on one nation so that all the other SIDS can benefit from the fruits. And of course, who better to communicate our plans to island people than a team of island people? So Our story with SIDS will truly begin in Sao Tome and Principe. This is a SIDS member which is uniquely eligible for UK innovation grants. And the relationship which SIDS has facilitated really supercharges our credibility. For thousands of years, these waters have been an untapped battery of solar heat energy. And there's 187 times more blue space than land. This is the Galapagos of Africa. Where better to develop a SIDS-friendly solution with land and biodiversity protection entwined than Sao Tome and Principe? These rainforests have the highest concentration of unique endemic species in the world, and we have to consider more creative solutions than just large-scale solar for SDG 7. Sao Tome and Principe understand that energy security cannot be pursued at the cost of food security or biodiversity protection. So much food is already imported. They might call them solar farms, but they're no good for food. Based on my discussions with Sao Tome and Principe, along with SIDS, I have discovered a very exciting and innovative team in place. The government have a plan which they're working towards, and they have credible support from UNIDO, SIDS, GEF, and other development organisations. So as it stands today, the world's first OTEC barge is going to power Sao Tome Island. Gender equality and diversity is already at the heart of the project planning. Sao Tomean children in their infancy today will design these steel boxes with vibrant colours which represent their culture. International investors will visit Sao Tome as where OTEC became first commercially available, and tourists will visit eco-resorts that were the first in the world powered by the ocean. They will not have to fly over acres of concrete and solar panels. The policy framework, the technology, the business plan that we're going to build in Sao Tome and Principe is then going to be exported out to all other SIDS, which will accelerate their achievement of clean, affordable and secure energy without compromise to their land or their livelihoods. And I believe that our public-private partnership with SIDS is what is going to make that a success. Thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to taking any questions.
Thank you, Dan. It's very passionate presentation. And next presentation is SIDS and the gender issue integration in SIDS Ocean Energy Program. Yeah. So floor is yours, Christine. Thank you.
Thank you. Greetings, colleagues, wherever in the world you are. And I'd like to thank UNIDO and CTCN for partnering with us on this very important webinar. I'm going to be very brief because I'll be handing over to my colleague, Nadia Mohammed, who's the project officer for energy at the CARICOM Secretariat. My job today is just to explain to the participants who exactly is SIDS and what is this Island Women Open Network all about. Next slide, please. So our mission is very simple. We are one of the only UN recognized organization that has all the rights and privilege of handling all the matters related to sustainable energy and climate resilience for small island developing states. Our mission, as you see, is to catalyze the transformation of the energy sector to increase our energy security, reduce greenhouse gases, and generate resources for investment in adaptation to climate change. SIDS is really a climate change story. Next slide, please. We have 4 principal functions, and in relation to this seminar today, deployment of technologies. We also assist with financing mechanisms that are available to our members as well. And we also connect with our partners so that we can develop public-private partnerships. The next slide, please. These are the goals of SIDS-DOC, 25, 50, 25 by 2033. And this is based on the research that we have done, which shows that we can increase our energy efficiency by 25%. We can have 50% of our electric power from renewable sources, and we can decrease our conventional transportation fuel use by 25%. And we can achieve this by 2033, but we would have to mobilize in excess of $20 billion. Next slide, please. UNIDO is the SIDS institutional partner, and we work with all the centers that are in the GenSec network. And as you see, we work with the regional centers that actually focus on small island developing states and the low-lying developing states that are members of not just SIDS-DOC, but of the Alliance of Small Island States. Next slide, please. The concept actually began in the early 2000s, and with subsequent support from Denmark, Austria, Spain, and other donors, we were able to have a soft launch of the Island Women Open Network at the 3rd UN conference on SIDS in Samoa in 2014. And since then, next slide, please. We have had a couple of meetings, one in 2016 in Grenada, on the sidelines of the first Regional Waste to Energy Technology Expo and Conference. And again, that was done in partnership with the CARICOM Secretariat, which took a leading role, as well as UNIDO and several other partners. Next slide, please. This is the leadership that has helped create the I1. The Grenada Prime Minister at the top right is the current president of the 5th Assembly of SIDS-DOC. Below that are the key women who play a role as chair and former chair. In the middle are the 3 and 4 gentlemen who were instrumental in ensuring that SIDS provided a space for women to participate in the transformation of the energy sector. Next slide, please. Again, these are just some of our partners and donors. Next slide, please. We're hoping that in 2020, UNIDO will in fact begin implementing the preparative phase for us to really scale this up, and we have an opportunity to do this with one of our projects. So that we're looking forward to. Next slide, please. This is just looking at the assumptions and rationale and addressing the missing link. Next slide, please. Thank you. And I now have the honor to hand over to my colleague, Nadia Mohammed from the CARICOM Secretariat. And I'd just like to mention that going forward with this energy program, any ocean energy program, Nadia will be representing the interest of the island women as we head towards Vienna for launching our ocean platform. Thank you again, UNIDO and CTCN, and to all the participants who joined us today.
Thanks, Christine.
To Nadia's presentation. Thank you, Nadia.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to speak on this. Today, I'm only briefly skimming the surface of this topic, but I do believe that this could be a whole webinar because there are so many dimensions to gender issues. Next. So why are we discussing gender in an ocean technology webinar? Well, gender equality and by extension, women's empowerment are central to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, and it has become a priority for many of our work programs. But importantly, it's part of the mandate of the SIDS-DOC Ocean Energy Program. And it has been shown that when women and men more equal, economies grow faster, more people are lifted out of poverty, and the overall well-being of societies is improved. And we also know that in most societies, women and children are the least equipped to cope with and adapt to climate change. So empowering women is a key way in making them more resilient. Next slide. As the other speakers would have mentioned, the successful deployment of ocean energy technologies offers many benefits and opportunities. But despite these benefits, the reality is that women don't enjoy the same opportunities and rights as men. Next slide, please. So taking gender concerns into account in the design and implementation of the ocean energy program is important for two reasons. First, there are differences between the roles of men and women that will demand different approaches. So when we think about the coastal communities where ocean energy technologies will be deployed, women and men often have defined roles. So for example, men are largely involved in fishing and women are mostly involved in household duties, farming, processing and trading activities, and gathering of shellfish and seaweed. And secondly, there are clear patterns of women's inferior access to resources and opportunities, and these include access to employment, education, and finance. Next. So how can we mainstream gender into the ocean energy program? Well, there are a number of methods and tools which can be used to mainstream gender. Gender equality issues actually have to be integrated at all stages of policy making and project programming, but it is especially important that we take it into account at the planning stage, because this is where we could properly identify the problems, the concerns, and the needs of the beneficiaries who the technologies will ultimately serve. Tools such as gender analysis and gender impact assessments are therefore critical. And also other factors that are equally important to ensure proper gender mainstreaming are political will, commitment to an awareness of gender equality issues, knowledge generation and exchange, and resources, including expertise in gender. Next slide, please. With the time allocation, I've just highlighted these considerations in relation to the ocean energy program. Now, our colleague from IRENA mentioned that we need to improve access to baseline data and to consult the public. Next slide, please. But one of our biggest issues right now is the lack of sex disaggregated data, which makes it difficult to actually identify the very challenges and opportunities that we are seeking to address. And as I mentioned before, gender sensitive baseline studies are going to be fundamental to informing project design and implementation, as well as for gender monitoring and evaluation. So we need to ensure that resources are allocated to increase not only the quality, but the quantity of sex disaggregated data. And this will not only help us to improve our policies, strategies, and programs, but it will also provide the evidence that is needed to raise awareness on the gender energy nexus, which I think, in my opinion, is too low right now. Next slide, please. Secondly, with respect to research and development, we know that significant research and technology transfer will be needed to bring ocean technology closer to the market. And one of our speakers spoke about the important role of academia. And there's evidence that to suggest that there's already a gender imbalance. So in 2020, just 30% of researchers worldwide are women. And in the context of ocean energy, 38% of marine scientists are women. So why are these numbers so low? Well, one reason, according to UNESCO, is that at each step of the ladder of scientific research, there's a drop in the number of females from bachelor's to master's to PhD, until when we reach the highest level of scientific research and decision making, there are very few women left. So that is the situation with respect to research. Next slide, please. When we look at skills, in order to develop the necessary for marine energy deployment, we're going to need several technology skills as well as other disciplines. But in particular, training in engineering and like electrical and mechanical engineering will be in demand. And what will also be useful is transferring existing oil and gas skills and resources towards developing ocean energy. So if we look at this from a gender perspective, we find that women account for 32% of the global renewable energy workforce, and they account for 22% of the share in the oil and gas industry globally. And then if we bring this to the Caribbean region in Trinidad and Tobago, which has a well-developed oil and gas sector, women accounted for less than 20% of the workforce in the energy sector in 2017. Next slide, please. And then when we look at university enrollment data over the last 5 years at the University of the West Indies, the engineering faculty actually has seen an average of 44% enrollment by females. So the point is, despite being qualified, women do not stay in the engineering and other STEM fields for several reasons. Some of those include income inequalities, lack of mentorship, controversy around motherhood, sexual harassment, gender roles, among others. Next slide, please. So if we want the women from our respective regions to play an active role in the deployment of ocean technologies, a key prerequisite would be for us to create awareness of the opportunities as well as access to the necessary technical, business, and leadership skills and training. When we are talking about gender responsive training, we must bear in mind that we have to consider time and travel constraints linked to domestic responsibilities, among other things. And when we're talking about gender sensitive recruitment, things we must look at include women being affected by restrictive norms. So for example, sometimes you see people set inappropriate physical requirements for jobs like heavy lifting or other restrictions such as working at night or requirements for working late hours. So these restrict the amount of applicants that we will get. And I think it's also important to reiterate here that when we're speaking about gender balance, it's not going to be a situation where women stand to gain and men lose, but more that the organizations, projects, and programs all benefit from a greater diversity of knowledge, skills, experience, and competencies that both men and women have to offer. Next slide, please. Okay, so there are a number of gender issues and recommendations that can and should be discussed. I know that this is just the start of the dialogue. So to wrap up now, my recommendations to all the partners involved in the Ocean Energy Program would be setting targets, for example, for recruitment of female staff, researchers, scientists, to encourage more women in the program. And I think it will be important to ensure that there is gender expertise available to guide the gender sensitivity that will be needed for policy development, as well as the planning, implementation, and monitoring and evaluation phases of the program. And also it's important to work closely with all stakeholders, including gender focal points in the government institutions, community organizations, and other implementing agencies. And finally, I want to close by saying that the achievement of gender equality will imply changes for both men and women. And to those of you in this virtual room who are in decision-making positions, you can make a difference here as you have more power to introduce changes. And I think men serving as advocates for women can go a long way in changing norms and biases. And I think we need to engage men to build greater awareness and understanding of some of the issues that should be considered for this program, as well as the wider energy transition. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Nadia. And this is the end of all the presentations. And we are a little behind the schedule, and we haven't received any written questions answered. So if you really desperately wish to ask a question, please press this hand icon. Otherwise, you can send the questions to us, and I can post to the particular speakers. And in the meantime, I'm from the CTCN, and let me briefly introduce about CTCN work. And we are part of the COP, and we are facilitating the transfer of technology between from the developed countries to developing countries according to the request. We have one request received from the Nauru, and we are currently conducting the feasibility study. And so, if your country and the interest in, this ocean energy, also, contact us and for the potential project. And sorry, it's like we have a Solomone Fifta from the PICRE, and you can briefly, greet the audience and introduce your organization. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for the opportunity, and good morning, everyone. It's such a joy to hear our colleagues from the Caribbean as well as those in Europe. And my apology for joining this very important webinar late. I'd like to say that the significance of the ocean to the lives of people in the Pacific goes back to time immemorial in terms of their source of food, in terms of transportation, in terms of their sports and recreation. It's reflected in their culture and dance, and as well as a source of energy too. And I guess this is understandable, given that the Pacific Islands are scattered around the midst of the largest ocean on Earth, covering about a third of the Earth's surface. And there is the growing preference that islands be called large ocean states. So much so that when the Pacific Island leaders met in 2017, they gave the Pacific Islands a new identity, the Blue Pacific identity. 18 nations, one Blue Pacific continent. 2 years later, when they met, their agenda was dominated by the opportunities of its Blue Pacific identity to reinforce their shared stewardship of the Pacific Oceans. They, however, noted that securing the future of the Blue Pacific cannot simply be left to chance, but rather requires a long-term vision. A vision that appreciates the strategic value that the Pacific region currently holds, provides unprecedented opportunities and leverage to realize the Blue Pacific continent. The leaders therefore endorsed the development of a 2050 strategy for the Pacific, for the Blue Pacific continent, to secure a bright and prosperous future for the Pacific. So this 2050 strategy for the Blue Pacific continent is still under development, but I can say with 100% confidence that making use of the unlimited ocean energy resources of the Pacific Ocean is part of this strategy. So even though in the Pacific right now, we have ocean-based energy projects, in particular French Polynesia, but we are looking forward for many more ocean energy projects in our region in the near future. Yeah, I guess that's what I want to say at this stage, that the ocean is on top of the Pacific leaders' priorities right now. And then we are looking at the strategy to make use of those opportunities, including the unlimited ocean-based energy resources that we can derive from the ocean. Thank you so much to CTCN and UNITO and SIDS for providing the opportunity for this very important webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Solomone, and good to see you. And we have, few hands raised, and apologies, and we don't have enough time to get your questions. And please address us your question writing by email, and so that I can forward it to the appropriate presenters. Apologies. So please, I'd like to hand over to Al and the Ban team for the concluding part of this session. Thank you.
Ella, you are here? Elbinger?
Go ahead, Martin.
Okay, should I just start, El, and you are concluding, right? Okay, thank you very much. I think we heard today the key ingredients to make this market for ocean energy technologies going. And that was, I think the key message was deploy, 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 and deploy. I think this was a very good point. So we are now in a stage where we're having some technologies which are already commercially or entering the commercially viability. So there is already the industrial upscale happening. We have that, for example, from the representative of Ocean Energy Europe. We heard that other technologies they will still take some time. And on the other hand, we heard there's a lot of interest for small island developing states to learn more about these technologies and also tap into these new technologies. Let's say for those which are already commercially available now or in the short term, and for those which still will need some time in the long term. So basically, to enter these value chains, we have to think about today how we tap into this. And that is the reason also why we, together with SIDS, we are proposing to create an action-oriented ocean energy industry platform for blue economies. This is also nicely coordinated with the initiative of IRENA, which the expert today also mentioned will go more on this high-level policy dialogue. We would like to focus really on industry-related issues, practical issues, technical issues, and to create a platform for doing so. Maybe, Tomo, I think you have put up a presentation. Maybe you can go to the next slide. I see that presentation in front of me. Is that correct? Yeah. So basically what we want to do with this ocean energy platform. So it would provide a practical makerspace between the ocean energy industry, which is mainly in emerging and industrialized countries, and to the small island development states, but also coastal lower income countries. So they have a similar situation, a similar need like the small island developing states. So they have huge industrial zones, blue industrial zones, actually, which are sometimes bigger and have more value creation potential than on the land, actually. So when those countries are interested to harness also this ocean energy potential. So we have on the one hand the industry, which has the interest to deploy, to test, to demonstrate, and to readapt the technologies and learn. And that to do that, it's necessary to work in different climates. We also heard that some technologies require different environments. OTEC, for example, more in the tropical zones, which in Europe, for example, then there's not so much potential, let's say, to test it in the northern Europe, for example. Then, on the other hand, we have the interest of the small island developing states and the lower income countries. They want to benefit from these technologies, and they don't want to miss the train, actually, to get into these value chains and benefit from these technologies. So we would like with this platform to address, let's say, a death valley, because currently in international technology cooperation and climate finance, you have really a gap. So what the situation what we have now is we have these both needs on both sides, but there are hardly any financing instruments available. There's also no existing platform bringing together these north-south interests, let's to say. So you will not find most of the funding streams currently are focused on research and development in Europe or in the US or in Asia, in Japan or in China. But you will find hardly instruments which are financing demonstrations in developing countries. It's not part of the development cooperation very often. It's not part of, often not considered in climate finance, as some of the technologies still in a pre-stage, let's to say. And these instruments usually don't differentiate also between the technologies which still need some time and those technologies which are ready for industrial upscale. So basically, we are proposing also to have here more impact, a regional approach, and that's doing that through our global network of regional sustainable energy centers. You have here two representatives in the meeting, one from the Pacific Center of Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency representing 22 member states. We have also the Caribbean Center here representing more than 15 CARICOM member states in the Caribbean. And we have other centers like the SACRE in Southern Africa, which covers, and ECRI in Western Africa, which covers also other small island development states in Africa. So basically what we can do through this platform, we can roll that out action-oriented through all the regions relevant for the SIDS and also LDCs, because most of those countries, of those centers are also covering coastal lower income countries. So that would bring us more scale, more impact in the short term and also in the long term. So we know that this is not a short-term process, it's a mid-term, long-term process. So what would be the activities of this platform? And I think we heard today already a lot about the barriers which are existing in industrial countries, and they exist even more in SIDS or small or low-income countries. So this platform would, and I put that first, is demonstration. Deploy, deploy, deploy. So getting done assessments, GS-based assessments, getting done feasibilities, do a joint lobbying for financing for these projects, and even also influencing international financing instruments to put that on the table also, to put that on the radar, that in the focus of such financing instruments. Then policy advisory and awareness, so including it in energy plans and policies. I think Irina already mentioned today an initiative in this regard. Knowledge and awareness, there's a lot to learn, and there's a lot to learn between the SIDS. So what in the Pacific, they have done already some things in ocean energy, but in the Caribbean also, so there's a lot of joint scope for learning, joint tools. We don't have to duplicate, we don't have to invent the wheel another time, we just translate it into different languages. Lessons learned. Another important point is qualification and certification, training, quality standards, and this kind of thing. Maybe Tomo, could you put the next slide? Here just the slide on the global network of regional sustainable energy centers, which shows you the different centers. And we also have a global platform, which is a virtual platform, but is also a physical platform. And under this physical platform, we are agreeing on a joint work plan and joint initiatives, like, for example, this ocean energy initiative. Maybe next slide. So briefly, why we need this initiative. I think today there was a lot of discussion about technologies, but why we need it? We need it because it's part of a wider discussion regarding blue economies and blue industry. So some say the industry future lies in the ocean. That is true already today, because a lot of money is made in the blue economy industry, and it's supposed to be the fastest growing industry branch, let's to say. Because by 2030, it's projected that around $3 trillion of global added value will be produced in the blue economy. And this includes not only just traditional activities like fishery, ports business, shipping, and so on. It includes also emerging new sectors, like also ocean energy. You can count into it, but you can count also other biotechnology and other important industry sectors which are now evolving, and the small island development states want to benefit also. So this is also very much connected to the discussion about Industry 4.0, because many of these new sectors need and show already a high involvement of these new digital technologies, like we heard today also. The wave energy needs, for example, predictable projection of wave industries, and here comes in the digital technologies. I won't go into details now of that, but also I would envisage that this discussion about ocean energy technologies is a broader one than just the classic ocean energy technologies like wave, SWOG we had today, tidal. It is also a discussion about technologies which using the marine coastal space. We heard today also offshore wind, floating PV, or hybrids. And but it's also let's say a blue economy industries which are using classic renewable energy and energy efficiency solutions. So we are talking here, for example, about ports, about fishery, aquaculture, desalination, freshwater production, which are using then classic renewable energy products and services adapted to the marine environment. That means in terms of ports, energy management systems, for example, or solar applications for other, for fishery or for aquaculture. Yes, basically next slide. So what we will do the next months, what we are trying to do is to get the platform going. Tomo, can you just put the next slide? So basically after that meeting, we would encourage people which were listening from companies, from organizations around the world who is interested to work on this initiative with us together. So we are searching for some of the champions also who want to bring that initiative forward. We would come up with technical working groups, and we would produce a baseline report and a project document also on the first operational phase of this, this initiative. And we would organize together with SIDS and the Gensec Center's follow-up webinars. And we try to aim to have this platform being presented at the upcoming 2021 Vienna Energy Forum next year in June. And we hope we can raise also some financing so that we can get this platform going. That was it from my side. El, I suppose you having additional comments from in the SIDS view?
No, I think that was very comprehensive, Martin, and it's 1 minute before noon and 1 minute before 1 in the afternoon for the colleagues. So we have to thank them for their patience and hanging in there with us. And just a final thank you to the presenters, and to say, you know, we'll be in touch. We appreciated the information and the insights that you shared with us. I think everybody signed off on this webinar is more educated, more informed than when they tuned in. And we talked about effective cooperation. And I think at the start, and I think that is where we're going to end, that we really do need effective cooperation among the vested interest groups. We need to develop a fair amount of indicative projects. And we need to put some of that technology that Laurent has and at Naval with Emmanuel to actually generate some of these scenarios So we have some numbers that we can actually talk about rather than just concepts and what it could do and what it would do. And that we actually have numbers to serve as a basis to begin to look at more feasibility studies. And I know Tumo said that yes, that the CTCN can support feasibility studies. So I think the group that wants to develop feasibility studies, we should start working with the CTCN and utilizing those resources to take the necessary steps on getting the studies done. Those are critical to us having a pipeline. So with that, I just want to say thank colleagues. Lots of thanks and lots of respect and lots of love for your interest in this subject. It is very important, as my buddy from the Pacific reminded us, you know, that Salamone told us the ocean is very important to us in the SIDS, and I think that was a point Dan made earlier as well. So thanks a lot. A big shout out to my buddy, my brother, Salamone down there in the Pacific. I hope things are good. Good hearing you, man. Okay. Thank you, Mart. Thank you, Tumo. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you for staying longer. And still, quite number of people, like listening to our presentations. And if you are interested in this platform, and please write to us. And also any questions, and welcome. And we try to answer as much as possible. Thank you very much today. And we will see you again soon.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Stay safe. Bye.